It is the federal government's job to secure our border, but the Biden administration has failed to do its job. So Texas is stepping up and doing what the federal government is supposed to do. I am about to sign a law that adds nearly $2 billion to border security in Texas. That is in addition to the more than $1 billion that was allocated during the regular session. Altogether, Texas is devoting $3 billion to secure our border. These funds are needed because the Biden administration's open border policies have opened the floodgates to illegal immigration, to crime, to human trafficking, to drug smuggling. These funds will help the Texas Department of Public Safety arrest more people at the border. They will help the National Guard to secure the Texas border. They will increase funding to build the border wall. They will provide grants for local counties as well as local law enforcement that are on the border, that are on the front line of having to respond to the crisis created by the Biden administration. And it will add more jail capacity for Texas to be able to put behind bars people who are coming across the border illegally and trespassing in Texas. Yesterday, the state signed a contract with companies to oversee construction of the border wall. They will quickly work to begin building that border wall. Now let me explain to you why we are making this announcement in Fort Worth. We need to understand and make clear that the challenges that you see on the border do not stay on the border. They come to every community in the state of Texas, in fact, go to communities across every state in the United States. One of the worst ways that what happens on the border affects communities like Fort Worth is with the importation and the distribution of drugs like fentanyl. Fentanyl is one of the deadliest drugs that exists. 2 milligrams of fentanyl is a deadly dose. This year alone already, state law enforcement officials have apprehended and seized more than 400 pounds of fentanyl. Put differently, they've seized more fentanyl to kill every man, woman, and child who live in Texas, California, and New York combined. Border security is a priority for all communities in Texas. What we have done so far, it builds upon the tremendous progress that we've taken to secure the border. The Texas Department of Public Safety, working with the National Guard, have already made more than 5,500 arrests, as well as more than 65,000 apprehensions of people coming across the border illegally. They have seized thousands of pounds of different types of drugs that have been brought across the border. And we have increased jail capacity to house more people that we are arresting for the crimes that I mentioned, as well as crimes like smuggling. I want to thank the people at the table with us today, but even some who are not, because this truly was an effort by everybody in the Texas House and Texas Senate. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick for his leadership in the Senate, as well as Senator Jane Nelson, who is chair of Senate Finance, and we'll be telling you more in a second, as well as Representative Chairman Greg Bonin, who is chair of the Texas House Appropriations Committee. I want to thank all of the members of the legislature, some of whom joined with us here today, some over there, some over here. Thank you all for stepping up and doing what our constituents really needed to have done. They need safe communities. You delivered for them safer communities in the state of Texas. And I also want to thank someone who will be speaking shortly and help you understand how this is such a local issue. And that is Manny Ramirez of the Fort Worth Police Officers Association. But first, I turn things over to Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick.
Thank you, Governor. And again, thank you for the initiative on this. You have been focused on this since we were elected in 2015. Just to give you a history, back in 2005, the state spent basically $0 on border security. It may have not been the issue then it is today, but through the sessions, the legislature really didn't focus on it. And then in 2015, when the governor was elected and I was elected, Chairman Nelson was appointed to finance, our senators, the House, we began to focus on it. It was the first session that we put $800 million in the budget because that's what Colonel McCraw of DPS told us that he needed. And we continued to do that every year since 2015. And this year we ramped it up to over $1 billion, and then we added another nearly $2 billion. And in the Senate, it also had bipartisan support. It was not just Republicans voting for the bill, because everyone recognizes what is happening on the border. President Biden's policies have one thing in common around the world: total chaos. If you look at the photographs outside the Kabul airport and you see the misery of those people trying to escape and get to America, actually, because of a total dysfunctional plan to evacuate people, and then look at the photographs from the drone yesterday of the 10,000 under the bridge, you could interchange those photographs. It is chaos everywhere by failed policies, failed planning. And as the governor said, it's the federal government's responsibility to protect our borders. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says that the United States, the federal government, must protect every state in the Union from domestic violence and incursion upon their territory and their property. This administration is not doing that. And the result of that is human trafficking in our state and in our country, criminals crossing the border, an impact on our state taxpayers and our healthcare system and our education system, and at the end of the day, losing control of our border and our state and our country. And that's why the governor stepped up and the legislature is behind him. This must not be allowed to continue. Just the last number, on average since 2005, we've apprehended about 435,000 people every year on the border. That's apprehended. 2/3 of that's in Texas. This year, we're approaching 2 million plus. If you do the math, in 2004, they said we had 10 million people here illegally, add 400,000 a year for the last almost 16 years, and 2 million this year, and that's only the people we've apprehended, not the people that get in. So you can see that the federal government, and under the Biden administration, 4 to 5 times more people are crossing the border illegally than ever, and they don't seem to care about Texans, Americans, or those even trying to get here. If you look at the misery of those people left under the bridge down in Del Rio. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Now, Senator Nelson.
Thank you. And thank you, Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick, for your leadership on this issue. Back in March, during the session, 6 senators, all female, went to the border to see with our own eyes what was going on. We were particularly interested in stories that we were hearing about the impact on women and children. Mm-hmm. And I was one of those who went down there, and it was heartbreaking, but eye-opening. We saw firsthand the consequences of having an insecure border. In fact, the day we arrived, we heard a story of a young woman and her child who were going across the Rio Grande in a raft, and it capsized and they died. We heard that troopers were seeing an unprecedented number of smuggling of drugs, which you mentioned, Governor, and humans and weapons and other threats to Texas. Of course, months later, we heard this bill in both the House. My counterpart in the House carried it over there, and I carried it in the Senate. And the hearings on those bills were also heartbreaking. Texas has sectors along the Rio Grande, along our border, and just the sector, the Del Rio sector, has 3 counties that actually border Texas, and that's where we went. And I asked the sheriffs representing those counties to come and testify. We have 15 members on Senate Finance, bipartisan. Every single senator voted this bill out of finance because they heard that testimony. You couldn't hear that testimony and not agree that we had to do something. You heard some of the numbers, but I want to tell you some more. We have seen historic highs, over 1 million this year, a 511% increase over 2020. Fentanyl seizures, it frightens me to death, and I'm glad you came here because Tarrant County is part of my constituency, and people need to understand that the impact is here. It's in all of our districts. I said when I laid the bill out on the floor of the Senate, this isn't a border problem. If you think of border counties, Texas is a border state, and this is impacting every part of our state. The drugs scare me, the weapons scare me, the human smuggling rips at my heart. And it is a darn shame that the federal government isn't doing its job. Now, as chairman of finance, Lieutenant Governor, there's a lot of things I could do with that money.
Right.
We could put it toward education, we could put it toward all kind of things. But if we can't protect our border,
Right.
what are we all about?
Right.
So I am so grateful. If you had heard the stories that we heard, you would understand that this is the most important thing we can do right now, is protect our border, protect this nation, and I appreciate your leadership in helping us do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Representative Bonin.
Thank you, Governor. There is a crisis at the border, and the consequences extend throughout the entire state and throughout our nation. There is no state that has ever done or ever made the commitment that the state of Texas is making to step in and fill the void where terrible federal policy has created an unmitigated disaster. It is an honor to serve with my colleagues, and I appreciate Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, and Speaker Phelan for their leadership on this issue that is of the greatest importance to the people of the state of Texas. It's also important to know that, as has been mentioned, not only are there consequences throughout the state, but this legislation provides $180 million to combat gang activity in our major metropolitan areas, because once it crosses the border, that is where it moves, and all of our communities, including here in Fort Worth, experience the consequences of that. Thank you for your leadership on this, and I'm very appreciative that we were able to get this done.
Thank you. And now we have Manny Ramirez of the Fort Worth Police Officers Association.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you everybody else who came to speak and everybody else who showed up to support this bill signing. The first and most important responsibility of any government is to keep the public safe. I'm proud that today Texas is doubling down on that commitment and proving to Texas that the rule of law will prevail and that Texas believes in law and order. With the signing of this bill, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, and state legislature, y'all are stepping up, and you're providing the necessary resources for our Texas law enforcement, both at the border and across the state, to keep our citizens safe. Now, here in Tarrant County, we know all too well that what happens at the border does not stay at the border. Our communities are inundated with criminal gang activity. They're inundated with illegal drug activity, and a lot of that is emanating from our border regions. Locally, in the past 12 months, our EMS providers have told us that there's been a 30% increase in overdoses. Our medical examiner right here in Tarrant County has said there's been a 1,000% increase in overdose deaths in the last 2 years. And our Fort Worth Narcotics Unit is seeing a exponential increase in fentanyl cases. And those cases place our hardworking law enforcement officers at risk every single day. And we already know that the dangerous defund the police rhetoric has decimated some of our Texas Police Department's budgets and taken necessary resources away from them. And now, the failed national security policies have opened our borders and left them vulnerable to activities like I just explained. But I'm proud that here in Texas, we refuse to sit idly by and let these things happen. In Texas, our legislators signed bills to stop the defunding of police. Our legislators signed bills to fix our broken bail system. And today, with the signing of this bill, our legislators are signaling that if we have to, we will take border security into our own hands.
Yep.
And I appreciate it. Because in Texas, when we see a problem, we don't stand idly by, we don't complain, we fix it. And so thank you, all of you, for your unquestionable commitment to public safety. I'm proud to join you today as you take the next step to protect Texas and the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I sign this law, I want to express the gratitude of myself, but frankly, the gratitude of all Texans for two people whose leadership, or without whose leadership, we would not be able to be effective in securing our border. And that includes Director McCraw, the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, and General Norris, the general in charge of the Texas National Guard. Yes. Thank you both for your service. Now to sign the law. This is basically signing a multi-billion-dollar check. Yes. Border security funding is now law in the state of Texas. All right. We'll take a few questions.
You mentioned that this was a failure of federal leadership that led to this. But I'd like to know just what you would say to the Texans out there who believe that this money would be better spent on other priorities such as education, fixing the electric grid, those things.
Let's be clear about a couple of things. One is, when you look at what the legislature did last regular session with funding education, was it more funding of education than ever before? So more funding of education than ever before in the history of the state. That we continued in this regular session. As it concerns the power grid, the public needs to know this. What the legislature did during the regular session, they winterized the grid. They ensured the integrity of the grid so that it wouldn't go down like it did this last time. What happened this last time is that the power generators and power transmitters, they weren't subject to being exempt from being shut down. That's why you saw the downtown city lights of Fort Worth on, but the residents without power. That's not going to happen next time because the integral parts of the power grid will remain on. There is now greater ability to generate more power than ever before in the history of the state of Texas, and most importantly is with the new leadership that we have, the way that the electric grid operates is completely different than the way this operated in the past. The way that it operated this past February and before that was in a crisis management mode. They literally waited until there was a crisis in order to summon more energy. Now they operate completely differently, where they get dispatchable power days in advance. That's why during the summertime, when people had concerns, gosh, would we run out of power on the power grid? And during the summer, we hit an all-time high in the amount of power demand. We were able to meet that demand with plentiful supply because of the new strategies that are being used both by ERCOT as well as by the PUC to make sure that the power stays on. All that said, as your own local police officer put it, public safety is essential to everybody in this state. As your local police officer put it, as well as the last time I was here talking about this issue, as the Tarrant County Sheriff put it, the safety of people in Fort Worth and Tarrant County is challenged by what's happening on the border. When I had my meeting with the border sheriffs at the border in Del Rio, there were sheriffs from the Panhandle there talking about how their communities were suffering from inadequate safety because of what had filtered through Texas that had crossed the border. This is important to the everyday lives of people across every region of the entire state of Texas. And so we are doing the right job for our fellow Texans by making our community safer, by addressing the border security in a way that the Biden administration is failing to do.
Governor, yesterday, about 10,000 people underneath that bridge. I guess a lot of people are wondering, where are they going to go? Do we see people ending up here in shelters in North Texas?
I will tell you the level of communication that we have had. This was yesterday, and that is the Department of Defense, as well as the Director of Homeland Security. They are in charge of the people who are under that bridge, most of whom are from Haiti. And they have told us that the people who are under that bridge right now are going to be relocated by the United States Department of Defense. Some are going to Arizona, others are going to California, others may be going to Laredo, we were told. But one thing that we know for a fact, and that is there's nothing but uncertainty and indecision by the Biden administration about exactly what they're going to do. That's why if you look at photos that the National Guard has posted just an hour ago, you will see the National Guard as well as the Department of Public Safety. They have a perimeter area around that bridge area to make sure that the community of Del Rio is safe. And let me tell you why they're there doing what they're doing. We spoke this morning, we being my chief of staff and myself, with the mayor of Del Rio. And he announced he was going to declare an emergency, which I assume has now been done already. He said that there were about 12,000 people under the bridge, with more coming. He asked for the Texas Department of Public Safety as well as the Texas Department of Transportation to help with barriers that we assured him would be provided, and they're already being provided. The mayor said he is going to shut down the city-owned toll bridge to stop traffic coming in from Mexico. And I understand that's already been done, and the state agencies are helping to do that. The mayor says the situation in his city and area is getting more tense under the bridge. We as state officials have an obligation to make sure that we use the National Guard, we use DPS, we use law enforcement at every level to de-escalate the tension around that bridge to make sure that we keep our state and our community safe.
The central theme of this is keeping Texans safe. Earlier today, I reported that across the state, at schools, an additional 23,000 kids were tested positive for COVID, and an additional 3,800 staffers have been tested positive for COVID on campuses. You and your government are fighting tooth and nail to prevent school districts and local governments from imposing mask mandates to keep the kids safe. So how do you reconcile the two, keeping people safe by shutting off the border, but not giving local governments the tools, or the means to make their own policies in an effort to keep their students and their citizens safe?
We've seen the challenges arise from a patchwork approach to trying to implement policies, because there are some jurisdictions that are following my executive order and others that are not, and that sows confusion among the populace. What we know are these facts, and that is in areas where people are vaccinated or where they have acquired immunity, their probability of getting COVID is slim to none. And because of that, what we are seeing is we've seen for more than 4 weeks now a decline in hospitalizations. And we've seen, going back to at least July the 23rd, a reduction in the positivity rate in the state of Texas. So the bottom line is that what's happening in Texas is a repetition of what we've seen in other jurisdictions, whether the other jurisdictions be states or countries, of the Delta variant quickly burning through a population and then fading away. And if that repetition continues, we've already seen the worst of the Delta variant, and we will soon see this variant of COVID hopefully soon passing, and people will be able to get back to their normal activities. That said, this is very important, and that is for wearing masks in schools, we believe in ultimate local control, and that is the parents. The parents have the right and the responsibility to make the decisions that parents believe is in the safest interest of their child.
When we spoke last week on the abortion bill, you said that it is a #1 goal for the state of Texas to eliminate rape. Is that a realistic goal, and if so, how do you plan to accomplish it?
Let me tell you what I've done, and which will show you a pathway of where we are going. And I can't give you every single detail because candidly that will take too long. But let me give you a synopsis of my approach to ensure that the state of Texas is doing everything that we can to reduce sexual assault in the state. Let's go back to when I was the Attorney General of Texas. When I was the Attorney General, I went and testified in the Texas Senate in support of legislation that they ultimately passed that made it a death penalty sentence for any repeat child sex offender. And then as Attorney General, I defended that law in court. In addition to that, when I was the Attorney General, I created a unit to investigate and to prosecute human trafficking in Texas. During that human trafficking, that's one of the ways that some women and children are subjected to being raped. More recently, as governor, I have processed more rape kits than any governor in the history of the state of Texas. Processing those rape kits helps to identify rapists that can lead to the prosecution. With the help of the people at this table here right now, with the chair of House Appropriations and the chair of Senate Finance, if I recall correctly, the number is you all appropriated about $100 million to increase crime lab testing and to clean out the backlog of rape kits in Texas. When we did that also, knowing that we would be cleaning out the backlog of rape kits and tested rape kits, we would also identify more people who were suspected rapists. Knowing that, we extended the statute of limitations to give prosecutors more time to be able to arrest and to prosecute those rapists. In addition to that, I signed a law creating Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force that is located in the office of the governor, and it helps sexual assault victims. And then on top of that, extremely importantly, during the regular session, I made it an emergency item that Texas pass bail reform. The reason for that is because there are some jurisdictions in the state of Texas where dangerous criminals were being, like rapists, were being released from jail, sometimes on personal recognizance bonds, going out into the community and reoffending. One of the best things that we can do to make sure that we do not have dangerous criminals back out on the streets is making sure we keep them behind bars. Because the Democrats broke quorum during the regular session, that bail reform bill did not pass. Because they did not show up for the first special session, that bail reform bill did not pass. I told them and I told Texas I would keep calling special sessions until we get that bail reform bill passed. Fortunately, the Democrats came back to the session, this most recent special session, and with the leadership of the people at this table as well as others, we passed bail reform in Texas, keeping more dangerous criminals like rapists behind bars. Relatedly, another bill that I wanted to see passed was to ensure that we would not, in Texas, defund police like what we've seen in other jurisdictions across the country. You see in large city after large city and other states across the country, crime is going up, including sexual assault, because of defund police programs. When police are defunded, that obviously means you have fewer police to respond to or protect people from people like rapists. I will not accept defunding police in Texas, which is why these legislators passed and I signed into law prohibitions and penalties for any jurisdiction that's even thinking about defunding the police. In addition to that, I created a child sex trafficking team in the office of the governor that is the national gold standard for dealing with these types of crimes, which once again, too often lead to sexual assault. This is just a thumbnail sketch of a long list of things that I've done to address sexual assault in Texas. We are committed to making sure that as we keep our community safe, we do more to help those who could be subject to sexual assault.
Can you speak
Great,
to that
thank you guys so
survivor?
much for coming, thank you.